To understand where human society came from, we first have to let go of one of the biggest misconceptions we've ever been taught. You've probably seen that famous illustration of evolution, the one where a hunched ape slowly transforms into an upright human, as if evolution followed a straight, predictable path. It's simple, it's memorable, and it's almost completely wrong. Human evolution wasn't a ladder with each species replacing the last. It was more like an enormous family tree with countless branches growing at the same time. For hundreds of thousands of years, multiple human species shared the planet together. While our ancestors were learning, adapting, and surviving, they weren't the only humans walking the earth. Species like Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and our own species, Homo sapiens, all existed at different overlapping periods. Some disappeared, others interbred. Some evolved along entirely different paths before fading into history. Evolution wasn't a race toward modern humans. It was a vast experiment, with many versions of humanity living side by side. That detail matters more than you might think. Because if we want to answer one of the oldest questions about our species, why do humans organise society the way we do? We first have to understand the world our ancestors actually lived in, not the simplified version we've inherited. Today, many people assume hierarchy is simply human nature. We imagine that strong men naturally rose to the top, became leaders, controlled resources, and everyone else followed. It feels intuitive because it's the world we've grown up in. But when anthropologists and evolutionary biologists looked at the evidence left behind by our ancestors, they discovered something surprising. For the overwhelming majority of human history, there is little evidence that people lived under permanent rulers, kings, or formal chains of command. Instead, early human communities appear to have relied on cooperation far more than domination. Survival wasn't won by the strongest individual. It depended on groups that could share resources, solve problems together, and prevent anyone from gaining too much power. In other words, the society we consider normal today may actually be one of the newest chapters in human history. And that raises a fascinating question. If our ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years living in relatively egalitarian groups, then how did we end up with kingdoms, patriarchy, social classes, and powerful elites? At what point did cooperation give way to hierarchy? The answer isn't as simple as men are naturally dominant or that's just evolution. In fact, the archaeological evidence tells a far more unexpected story. So before we talk about kings, patriarchy, or power, we need to travel back to the beginning, to a time when being human meant something very different than it does today. Reverse dominance, the forgotten human superpower. If hierarchy is supposedly natural, then why don't we see it everywhere in nature? Our closest living relatives offer a fascinating comparison. Chimpanzees organise themselves around rigid male hierarchies. The strongest males climb to the top through intimidation, strategic alliances, and, when necessary, outright violence. Status is earned by dominance, and maintaining it often means reminding everyone who's in charge. Bonobos, despite sharing nearly the same amount of DNA with us, have evolved a remarkably different system. Their societies are centred around cooperation among females. Instead of allowing the strongest individual to rule through force, female coalitions balance power and help maintain social harmony. So here's the puzzle. Humans are genetically just as close to bonobos as we are to chimpanzees. If biology alone determined our social structure, why didn't we become exactly like one of them? Because we evolved something neither species possesses. Anthropologists call it reverse dominance hierarchy. Rather than rewarding individuals who tried to dominate everyone else, early human communities often did the opposite. Whenever someone became too controlling, too greedy, or too eager to command others, the rest of the group worked together to bring that person back down. Christopher Bone, in his influential research on early human societies, argues that this wasn't an occasional behaviour. It was a defining feature of our species. Power wasn't concentrated. It was constantly checked. Imagine a hunter who begins demanding the largest share of every meal simply because he made the kill. At first, nobody confronts him directly. Fighting a physically stronger person would be dangerous. Instead, something far more effective happens. People stop sharing with him. They exclude him from future hunts. They ignore his opinions. His jokes no longer earn laughter. His presence becomes invisible. In a world where survival depended entirely on your community, losing the trust of the group wasn't just embarrassing, it could be fatal. Isolation meant fewer hunters watching your back, fewer people willing to share food, fewer hands to help when you were injured. For our ancestors, social rejection carried consequences far greater than wounded pride. But what if someone refused to back down? What if they continued threatening violence and trying to control everyone else? Then the group had one final safeguard: collective action. Ethnographic records suggest that truly dangerous individuals could be exiled from the community. In the most extreme cases, entire groups made the difficult decision to execute those who posed an ongoing threat to everyone else's survival. It sounds brutal, but from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense. A single tyrant could destroy the cooperation that kept dozens of people alive. Removing one individual protected the entire community. This reveals something profound about human nature. For most of our evolutionary history, leadership wasn't about commanding others. Influence had to be earned. A skilled tracker might guide a hunting expedition because they knew the land better than anyone else. An experienced healer might decide which plants could treat an illness. An elder might settle disputes because others respected their wisdom. But once that moment passed, so did their authority. Leadership was temporary. It belonged to the person with the right knowledge, not the person with the most power. For tens of thousands of years, humans survived not because we obeyed the strongest individual, but because we refused to let anyone become one. The biggest lie. We've been told about human evolution. Picture a prehistoric woman. What's the first image that comes to mind? Maybe she's sitting near a campfire with a baby in her arms. Perhaps she's gathering berries while the men disappear into the distance, spears in hand, hunting mammoths and bringing home dinner. If that's what you imagined, you're not alone. For decades, this has been the dominant story of human evolution. But there's one problem. Much of it isn't supported by the evidence. The idea became famous after a 1966 academic conference known as the Man the Hunter Symposium. At the time, many anthropologists believed that hunting large animals was the defining behaviour that made humans intelligent, cooperative, and uniquely successful. Because hunting was assumed to be an exclusively male activity, an even bigger conclusion followed. If hunting made us human, then men were supposedly the primary architects of human evolution. The theory spread rapidly. It found its way into university textbooks, museum exhibits, documentaries, and eventually popular culture. Before long, it wasn't treated as a hypothesis anymore. It became accepted as fact. Generations grew up believing that civilization was built by hunters, while everyone else simply supported them. But there was an uncomfortable problem hiding in plain sight. Even at the very conference where this surprising. The majority of their calories didn't come from hunting at all. Instead, roughly 60 to 80% of their food came from gathered plants, roots, nuts, seeds, and other foraged resources. Hunting was important, but it wasn't the primary source of survival. So why did the hunting narrative dominate? Part of the answer lies in how people interpreted value. A successful hunt was dramatic. It produced exciting stories, dangerous encounters, and impressive displays of skill. It looked heroic. Gathering, by comparison, seemed ordinary. Collecting edible plants didn't inspire the same excitement as chasing down a massive animal across open terrain. As a result, many researchers underestimated its complexity and treated it as little more than background work. That assumption shaped decades of scientific thinking. Women's contributions were often described as support roles, while hunting became the centerpiece of humanity's evolutionary story. But the archaeological evidence tells a much more balanced story. Human survival wasn't built around one extraordinary hunt. It was built around consistency. A hunting expedition could fail. Sometimes hunters returned empty-handed after spending days tracking prey. Gathering couldn't afford to fail. Every single day, someone needed to know where food could be found, which plants were poisonous, which ones were nutritious, and how seasonal changes transformed the landscape. Those weren't simple tasks. They required years of accumulated knowledge passed down across generations. Provided the most reliable source of food for the entire community. That changes the story entirely. Instead of imagining one group creating civilization while another merely supported them, a different picture begins to emerge. Human evolution wasn't driven by a single role. It was powered by cooperation. Every successful hunt depended on knowledge gathered over generations. Every gathering expedition required memory, planning, navigation, and ecological expertise. Neither role existed in isolation. The real question then isn't whether hunting or gathering mattered more. It's why we spent so many years celebrating one while almost forgetting the other. Because once we understand what gathering is, the stereotype of prehistoric life begins to fall apart completely.